The morning sun cast long shadows across Arlington National Cemetery as Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez adjusted his crisp dress blue uniform one final time. Today marked his first day as a tomb guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, the highest honor a Marine could receive in ceremonial duties. His hands, steady from years of combat training, smoothed down the gold buttons that gleamed like mirrors in the early light. Michael had dreamed of this moment since he was 8 years old, watching his grandfather's military funeral with wide eyes filled with respect and wonder. His grandfather had served in World War II, and the precision of the honor guard that day had planted a seed in young Michael's heart. 20 years later, after 3 tours in Afghanistan and countless hours of training, he finally stood ready to take his place among the elite few who guard America's most sacred site. The weight of responsibility pressed on his shoulders like a physical force. He knew that millions of visitors would watch his every move. The tourists from around the world would judge not just him, but his entire country based on his performance. The tomb guards were more than soldiers. They were living symbols of honor, discipline, and unwavering dedication to those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. His commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, had pulled him aside the previous evening with words that still echoed in his mind. "Rodriguez, tomorrow you join a brotherhood that dates back decades. Every step you take, every turn you make carries the weight of history. You're not just guarding a tomb. You're protecting the memory of every unknown soldier who died for this nation." Michael understood the gravity completely. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier represented every American service member whose body was never identified or recovered. These fallen heroes had no names on headstones, no families to visit their graves, no one to remember their individual stories. The tomb guards served as their eternal honor guard, ensuring they were never forgotten, never alone. As he walked toward the white marble tomb, Michael felt the eyes of early morning joggers and dedicated visitors who came before the crowds arrived. Some placed their hands over their hearts, others stood in respectful silence, and a few veterans saluted. The atmosphere was sacred, almost church-like in its reverence. The tomb itself stood magnificent and solemn, carved from white Colorado marble. The inscription read, "Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God." Those simple words carried immeasurable weight, representing not just the unknown soldiers interred there, but countless others who had given their lives in service to their country. Michael's training had been grueling and precise. Every movement was choreographed down to the smallest detail. His walk would consist of exactly 21 steps south, a 21-second pause, 21 steps north, and another 21-second pause. The number 21 represented the highest military honor, a 21-gun salute. His rifle, an M14 with a fixed bayonet, would be transferred from shoulder to shoulder, with movements so sharp they could cut glass. The changing of the guard ceremony was scheduled for later that morning, and Michael knew tourists would arrive in droves to witness the spectacle. School children would watch with amazement, veterans would stand with tears in their eyes, and foreign dignitaries would observe the precision that had made American military ceremonies legendary worldwide. But this particular morning held something unexpected. Word had reached the cemetery that a member of the British Royal Guard would be visiting as part of a cultural exchange program. Guardsman James Wellington from the Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace was touring American military installations to study ceremonial practices and build international military relationships. The British Royal Guards were equally famous for their discipline and precision. Their red uniforms and tall bearskin hats were recognized worldwide, and their stoic demeanor while standing guard at royal palaces had become the stuff of legend. Like Michael, James had dedicated his life to ceremonial excellence and the protection of sacred traditions. Michael had heard stories about the British Guards' training, how they stood motionless for hours despite weather, crowds, and distractions. He respected their dedication and understood that despite representing different nations, they shared a common bond of service and honor. Both men had chosen careers that demanded perfection, selflessness, and unwavering commitment to duty above all else. As Michael began his walk, each step measured and deliberate, he noticed a figure in a crisp military uniform standing among the early visitors. The man stood perfectly straight, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes focused intently on the ceremony unfolding before him. Even from a distance, Michael could recognize the bearing of a professional soldier. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Birds chirped softly in nearby trees, but their songs seemed muted out of respect for the solemnity of the place. Michael's footsteps created a rhythmic cadence on the marble plaza, a sound that had echoed in this sacred space thousands of times before. Tourists began to gather as word spread that the changing of the guard was about to begin. Cameras appeared, children pointed excitedly, and adults hushed their voices to whispers. The crowd formed a respectful semicircle around the tomb area, maintaining the required distance while positioning themselves for the best view of the ceremony. Michael continued his measured walk, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand. Every muscle in his body was controlled, every breath calculated. This was more than a job or even a calling. It was a sacred trust passed down from guard to guard, generation to generation. He carried the hopes and prayers of Gold Star families, the gratitude of veterans, and the respect of a grateful nation. James Wellington had arrived in Washington, D.C. 3 days earlier as part of an unprecedented military exchange program between the United Kingdom and the United States. His red tunic and bearskin hat had been carefully packed away, replaced by his dress uniform bearing the insignia of the Coldstream Guards. The 26-year-old soldier had spent the last 5 years standing guard at Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and the Tower of London, becoming one of the most respected ceremonial guards in the British Army. The flight across the Atlantic had given James time to reflect on the honor he had been given. Out of thousands of royal guards, he had been selected to represent the Queen's Guard in this cultural exchange. His superiors had chosen him not just for his impeccable record, but for his ability to observe, learn, and represent British military tradition with dignity and respect. James had grown up in a small village outside London, where his father worked as a blacksmith and his mother taught at the local primary school. Military service ran in his family. His great-grandfather had served in the trenches of World War I, and his grandfather had fought alongside American forces during World War II. The stories of Allied cooperation and shared sacrifice had shaped James's understanding of the special relationship between Britain and America. His training as a Royal Guard had been legendary in its intensity. Months of drilling until every movement became automatic. Hours of standing perfectly still while tourists tried to make him laugh or react, and endless practice until his rifle movements were sharp enough to cut through air itself. The bearskin hat alone weighed nearly 2 pounds and stood 18 inches tall, making balance and neck strength crucial elements of the job. James had always admired American military precision from afar. He had watched videos of the Marine Silent Drill Platoon, studied footage of Arlington ceremonies, and read about the dedication required to become a tomb guard. The opportunity to witness these ceremonies in person and exchange knowledge with his American counterparts filled him with genuine excitement and professional curiosity. Standing among the early morning visitors at Arlington, James felt the same reverence he experienced at Westminster Abbey or during changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. Sacred places had their own atmosphere, regardless of country or culture. The white marble tomb before him commanded the same respect as the memorials he guarded in London, and he understood immediately why this place held such significance for Americans. He watched Michael's precise movements with the trained eye of a professional. Every step was calculated, every gesture deliberate. The American Marines' bearing reminded James of his own brothers in arms, men who had dedicated their lives to ceremonial perfection and the honor of their nation. Despite the differences in uniform and location, the commitment was identical. The crowd around James began to grow as word spread about the upcoming changing of the guard ceremony. He noticed school groups arriving with teachers who spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the significance of the tomb. Veterans approached with their families, many wearing caps or pins indicating their own military service. Foreign tourists consulted guidebooks and positioned cameras for the best shots. A young boy, perhaps 7 years old, tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed toward James. "Mommy, is that soldier from England?" he whispered loudly. The mother looked embarrassed and tried to quiet her son, but James caught the boy's eye and gave him the slightest nod of acknowledgement. The child's face lit up with wonder and excitement. James understood the boy's fascination. Military ceremonies had the power to inspire and teach, to connect people across generations and cultures. When he stood guard at Buckingham Palace, he often saw that same look of wonder in children's eyes. These moments reminded him why ceremonial duties mattered beyond the precision and tradition. They inspired the next generation to value service, honor, and dedication. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the marble plaza. James observed how the changing light affected the ceremony, how Michael's uniform seemed to glow against the white stone of the tomb. In London, weather was always a factor during outdoor ceremonies. Rain, wind, heat, and cold all tested a guard's resolve and training. Today's clear sky provided perfect conditions for the ceremony. As more visitors arrived, James noticed the diverse crowd gathering. Military families stood alongside international tourists. Veterans shared space with curious civilians, and children pressed close to their parents for better views. This mixing of people from all walks of life reflected something beautiful about these ceremonies. They brought people together in shared respect and admiration. A group of Korean War veterans, their caps bearing unit insignia and service ribbons, positioned themselves near James. One of the elderly men leaned heavily on a walking stick, but his posture straightened as he watched Michael's measured pace. These veterans understood the significance of the unknown soldier better than most. They had served alongside men who never came home, friends whose bodies were never recovered. James felt a connection to these veterans that transcended nationality. British and American forces had fought side by side in Korea, just as they had in 2 world wars and would continue to do in conflicts around the world. The bonds forged in combat created lasting friendships between nations and their military traditions. The sound of Michael's footsteps created a rhythm that seemed to match James's own heartbeat. Having spent countless hours in similar ceremonies, he could appreciate the physical and mental discipline required to maintain such precision. The American Marines' movements were flawless, each step covering exactly the same distance, each pause lasting precisely the same duration. A tour guide began explaining the ceremony to a group of international visitors, describing the significance of the 21 steps and the meaning behind each element of the ritual. James listened with professional interest, noting how the guide emphasized the sacred nature of the duty and the rigorous selection process for tomb guards. The parallels to his own service were striking. Near the tomb, other members of the old guard stood ready for the changing ceremony. These soldiers represented the best of American military tradition, just as James represented the finest of British ceremonial guards. Soon the paths of these 2 military traditions would cross in an unexpected way that would leave everyone present with memories they would carry forever. The moment that would change everything began with a simple misstep in protocol. Colonel Harrison, who had been showing James around Arlington as part of the exchange program, made an innocent error that would create an unforgettable encounter. As he guided the British guardsman toward the ceremonial area to observe the changing of the guard, he accidentally led James into the restricted zone surrounding the tomb. Michael, maintaining his precise 21-step pattern, noticed the breach immediately. His training was clear and absolute. No unauthorized personnel were allowed within the tomb area during active guard duty. It didn't matter who the person was or what their rank might be. The sanctity of the tomb took precedence over all other considerations. His duty was to protect this sacred space from any and all intrusions. Without breaking stride or altering his measured pace, Michael's mind rapidly assessed the situation. The unknown man in the military dress uniform appeared to be a dignitary of some sort, but protocol was protocol. The tomb had been desecrated by inappropriate behavior in the past, and every guard was trained to address breaches with immediate and decisive action. There was no room for hesitation or second-guessing. As Michael completed his 21 steps south and began his turn, he made eye contact with James. The British guardsman immediately realized something was amiss when he saw the American Marine's focused gaze. James's own training kicked in, and he recognized the look of a soldier who was about to enforce regulations. Having been in similar situations himself at Buckingham Palace, he understood the position Michael was in. Colonel Harrison, engrossed in explaining the history of the tomb to James, remained unaware of the developing situation. He continued his commentary about the selection process for tomb guards and the significance of the unknown soldiers, not noticing that they had wandered too close to the restricted area. The colonel's intentions were entirely respectful and educational, but his momentary lapse in attention to their exact position had created an unexpected confrontation. The crowd of spectators began to sense that something unusual was happening. Cameras that had been focused on the tomb ceremony slowly turned toward the two uniformed figures who seemed to be in some sort of standoff. Whispered conversations started among the tourists as they tried to understand what was unfolding before them. James, drawing on his years of experience dealing with protocol breaches at royal palaces, immediately understood what needed to happen. Without waiting for Michael to speak, he stepped forward with the same precision and dignity he had displayed countless times when tourists violated boundaries at Buckingham Palace. His movements were measured and respectful, acknowledging both the American Marines' authority and the sacred nature of the space they occupied. Michael, surprised by James's immediate understanding and cooperation, found himself in an unusual position. Most protocol breaches involved confused tourists or disrespectful visitors who needed firm correction. This man clearly understood military protocol and was responding with the professionalism of a fellow service member. The situation required a different approach than the standard stern warning issued to civilian violators. The two guards stood face to face, each representing their nation's highest ceremonial traditions. Michael held his M14 rifle at port arms, his posture rigid and authoritative. James maintained his own military bearing, hands at his sides, showing clear respect for both the American Marines' position and the solemnity of the location. Neither man spoke, but their mutual understanding was evident in their stance and demeanor. Spectators in the crowd began reaching for their phones and cameras, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. A group of schoolchildren, who had been chattering excitedly about the ceremony, fell silent as their teacher pointed toward the two soldiers. Veterans in the crowd straightened their own postures, recognizing the significance of what was happening. Colonel Harrison finally noticed the situation and quickly moved to intervene, but something in the bearing of both men made him pause. This wasn't a confrontation that needed diffusing. It was a moment of mutual professional respect playing out in real time. Both guards were handling the situation with the dignity and protocol their training demanded, creating an impromptu demonstration of military bearing that was more powerful than any planned ceremony. The silence stretched between Michael and James, but it wasn't uncomfortable or tense. Instead, it carried the weight of shared understanding between two professionals who had dedicated their lives to similar purposes. Each man recognized in the other the same commitment to duty, honor, and precision that defined their own service. Michael's mind raced through his options. Standard protocol called for a firm verbal warning and immediate removal of the violator from the restricted area. However, this situation was clearly different. The man before him was obviously a fellow service member, and his immediate response suggested he understood both the breach and the appropriate way to address it. James, for his part, appreciated Michael's restraint and professionalism. At Buckingham Palace, he had seen guards handle similar situations with varying degrees of force and formality. Michael's approach demonstrated the same kind of measured response that the best royal guards employed when dealing with protocol violations by dignitaries or fellow military personnel. The crowd watched in fascination as the two guards maintained their silent standoff. Some spectators began to realize they were witnessing an encounter between representatives of two of the world's most prestigious ceremonial military units. The significance of the moment wasn't lost on those who understood military tradition and the rarity of such meetings. A veteran in the crowd, his own military bearing evident despite his civilian clothes, whispered to his wife, "That's a British Royal Guard. I served with some of their lads in Afghanistan. This is something special happening here." His words rippled through the nearby spectators, adding to the sense that they were witnessing a unique moment in military history. What happened next defied every expectation the crowd had formed about military protocol and ceremonial confrontations. Instead of the harsh verbal correction that spectators anticipated, Michael made a decision that would be talked about for years to come. Recognizing that James was clearly a fellow professional who understood the gravity of the situation, Michael chose to address him with the respect due to a visiting military dignitary. In a voice that carried across the marble plaza with crystal clarity, Michael spoke the words that would electrify the gathering crowd. "Sir, I must respectfully request that you step back from the restricted area. This is a sacred space dedicated to America's unknown fallen, and protocol requires that I maintain its sanctity." His tone was firm but respectful, acknowledging James's obvious military bearing while still enforcing the necessary boundaries. James's response was immediate and perfectly calibrated. Drawing himself to full attention with a precision that matched Michael's own bearing, he replied in his crisp British accent, "My deepest apologies, Marine. I understand completely and will withdraw immediately. I meant no disrespect to your fallen or to your sacred duty." His words carried genuine remorse and professional respect, showing the crowd that this was no ordinary tourist stumbling into restricted space. The exchange sent ripples of amazement through the assembled spectators. Here were two of the world's most elite ceremonial guards engaging in a moment of pure professional courtesy under the most formal circumstances imaginable. The contrast between the seriousness of the protocol breach and the mutual respect displayed by both men created an atmosphere of profound dignity that left many observers visibly moved. Michael, maintaining his ceremonial bearing, gave James the slightest nod of acknowledgement before returning to his prescribed routine. But something had changed in his demeanor. While still maintaining the precision required of his position, there was a new element of shared professional pride in his movements. He had successfully handled a delicate situation while honoring both his duties and a visiting military professional. James stepped back to the appropriate viewing area with movements that mirrored Michael's own precision. Every step was measured, every gesture deliberate, showing the crowd that his understanding of military protocol was complete and genuine. As he rejoined the spectator area, his bearing remained perfect, demonstrating that even a protocol correction couldn't diminish his professional pride. Colonel Harrison, who had finally grasped the full significance of what had just occurred, approached James with obvious relief and growing admiration. "Guardsman Wellington, I apologize for my error in guidance. Your handling of that situation was exemplary." James's response was characteristically modest. "No apology necessary, Colonel. The Marine was absolutely correct to enforce protocol, and I respect his dedication to duty." The crowd's reaction was immediate and powerful. Spontaneous applause broke out from several sections of spectators, led by the veterans who recognized the exceptional professionalism both men had displayed. What could have been an embarrassing incident had instead become a demonstration of the finest military traditions from both nations. A group of tourists from Japan began taking photos with obvious excitement, recognizing they had witnessed something extraordinary. An elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, moved by the dignity both men had shown in their brief exchange. A teenage boy turned to his father and asked, "Dad, why was that so special?" His father struggled to find words to explain the rare combination of duty, respect, and professionalism they had just observed. Michael continued his ceremonial walk, but the dynamics of the entire scene had shifted. Spectators watched with renewed attention and respect, understanding they were witnessing not just a routine ceremony, but a living demonstration of military excellence. The precision of his movements seemed even more impressive in the context of how he had just handled an unexpected situation. James, now positioned properly among the other observers, watched Michael's continued performance with professional appreciation. Having been in similar situations countless times at royal palaces, he understood the mental discipline required to maintain ceremonial precision while simultaneously handling protocol enforcement. Michael's seamless transition between correction and ceremony demonstrated mastery of his craft. The incident had created an unexpected bond between the two guards that was evident to everyone present. While they had returned to their respective positions and duties, there was a sense of mutual recognition and respect that elevated the entire ceremony. The crowd could feel it, and many began to understand they were witnessing something that transcended normal military routine. A military historian in the crowd, recognizing the significance of the moment, began quietly explaining to nearby tourists that they had just seen representatives of two military traditions that stretched back centuries. The British Royal Guards traced their origins to the 1660s, while American ceremonial guards evolved from colonial militia traditions. What you just saw was hundreds of years of military tradition meeting in mutual respect. Social media posts began appearing almost immediately as spectators shared photos and videos of the encounter. The hashtag #2Guards began trending within hours as people around the world shared the story of the American Marine and British Royal Guard, whose brief encounter had demonstrated the finest aspects of military professionalism. News crews, monitoring social media for interesting stories, began receiving tips about the unusual incident at Arlington. Within the hour, reporters were making calls to military public affairs offices, trying to understand what had happened and whether interviews might be possible with the two guards who had inadvertently created an international sensation. The changing of the guard ceremony continued with heightened attention from the crowd. Every movement was watched with greater appreciation, as spectators understood they were seeing the same level of precision and dedication that had been displayed in the unexpected encounter between Michael and James. The formal changing of the guard ceremony began exactly on schedule, but the atmosphere was unlike anything anyone present had ever experienced. The crowd, now numbering in the hundreds, watched with an intensity and reverence that seemed to charge the very air around the tomb. What had started as routine mourning ceremony had been transformed by the encounter between Michael and James into something approaching a sacred event. The relief guard approached with movements so precise, they seemed choreographed by angels. Each step covered exactly 30 inches, each turn executed with mathematical perfection. The crowd stood in complete silence, many holding their breath as they witnessed the culmination of months or even years of training condensed into a few minutes of flawless execution. Michael, despite having completed this ceremony dozens of times, felt the weight of the moment differently than ever before. The presence of James Wellington among the spectators added a layer of international significance to the ceremony. He wasn't just representing the United States Marine Corps anymore. He was demonstrating American military excellence to a representative of one of the world's oldest and most respected military traditions. James watched the ceremony unfold with the trained eye of someone who understood every nuance of ceremonial precision. The timing, the spacing, the weapon handling, all of it reminded him of his own ceremonies at Buckingham Palace. Yet each element was uniquely American. The white gloves, the specific rifle movements, the cadence of the march all reflected a military culture that was both similar to and distinct from his own. As the ceremony progressed, something unprecedented began to happen. James, without any prompting or planning, began to mirror some of Michael's movements from his position in the crowd. His bearing straightened even further, his hands moved to ceremonial positions, and his breathing synchronized with the rhythm of the ceremony. It was an unconscious display of professional solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by the observant crowd. A photographer from the Washington Post, who had arrived following social media reports of the earlier encounter, began capturing images that would later become iconic. The juxtaposition of the American Marine performing his sacred duty, while the British Royal Guard stood at attention among civilians, created powerful visual narratives about military tradition, international friendship, and shared values. The ceremony reached its climactic moment as the new guard assumed his position and Michael prepared to be relieved. According to protocol, the departing guard would march away with the same precision he had maintained throughout his watch. But as Michael began his final sequence of movements, something extraordinary occurred that no one present would ever forget. James Wellington, recognizing the conclusion of Michael's watch and drawing on his own deep understanding of military courtesy, did something that shocked everyone present. From his position in the crowd, he came to perfect attention and rendered a crisp military salute, not to Michael personally, but to the tomb, the ceremony, and everything it represented. His salute was held with perfect form as Michael completed his final movements. The gesture sent shockwaves through the crowd. Veterans immediately recognized the significance of what they were seeing. A representative of the British Royal Guards paying formal respects to America's unknown soldier. Many reached for their phones to capture the moment, while others simply stood transfixed by the power of what was unfolding before them. Michael, catching sight of James's salute in his peripheral vision, felt a surge of emotion that he had to carefully control to maintain his ceremonial composure. The British guardsman's spontaneous gesture of respect represented everything noble about military service. Honor transcending nationality, professionalism bridging cultures, and respect flowing between warriors regardless of the flag they served. The crowd's reaction was immediate and profound. Several veterans in the audience began saluting as well, creating a wave of tribute that rippled through the spectator area. Children asked their parents what was happening, and adults struggled to find words adequate to explain the significance of the moment they were witnessing. Colonel Harrison, observing from a position that allowed him to see both guards clearly, felt his own eyes growing moist. In 30 years of military service, he had never seen such a spontaneous and genuine display of international military respect. The morning's accidental protocol breach had somehow evolved into one of the most moving ceremonies he had ever witnessed. A group of visiting foreign dignitaries, who had come to Arlington as part of their own diplomatic mission, stood mesmerized by what they were seeing. The Danish ambassador whispered to his aide, "This is why the American military is so respected around the world. Look at the dignity, the precision, the mutual respect. This is leadership in action." The ceremony concluded with Michael marching away from the tomb with the same perfect precision he had maintained throughout his watch. But as he passed the section where James stood among the spectators, something passed between the two men, a look of mutual recognition and respect that acknowledged their shared commitment to military excellence. James maintained his salute until Michael had completely departed the ceremonial area, then slowly lowered his hand with the same precision he would have used during a ceremony at Windsor Castle. The crowd remained silent for several moments after the formal ceremony ended, as if collective recognition that they had witnessed something that transcended normal military routine. Social media exploded with posts, photos, and videos of the encounter. The two guards began trending worldwide as people shared the story and images of the American Marine and British Royal Guard, whose interaction had created an unforgettable moment of international military courtesy. News outlets from London to Tokyo picked up the story, recognizing its appeal as a symbol of Allied cooperation and shared military values. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the two men themselves. Michael and James had discovered in their brief encounter a connection that spoke to the universal brotherhood of professional soldiers. Despite their different uniforms, different accents, and different national allegiances, they shared something deeper, an unwavering commitment to duty, honor, and the protection of sacred traditions. The aftermath of the ceremony created ripple effects that neither Michael nor James could have anticipated. Within hours, video footage of their encounter had been shared millions of times across social media platforms. News crews from major networks arrived at Arlington seeking interviews, while military public affairs officers fielded calls from reporters around the globe who wanted to understand the significance of what had transpired. Michael, following his watch duty, was approached by his commanding officer with news that would change his perspective on military service forever. "Rodriguez, you need to know that what happened out there today has captured international attention. The British Embassy has formally commended your professionalism, and the Pentagon is asking for a full report on the incident. You represented not just the Marine Corps today, but the entire United States military." The weight of this responsibility both humbled and inspired Michael. He had simply followed his training and treated a fellow professional with the respect military tradition demanded. That his actions had resonated so broadly reminded him of why he had chosen this path of service. Military ceremonies weren't just displays of precision. They were living demonstrations of the values that free societies held dear. James Wellington, meanwhile, found himself in an equally unexpected position. His commanding officer in London had received calls from both the British Ministry of Defense and the American military attaché's office. The spontaneous salute he had rendered to the tomb of the unknown soldier had been interpreted as a formal gesture of respect from the British Royal Guards to their American counterparts. "Guardsman, Wellington," his colonel explained during a secure phone call from London, "what you did today has been viewed by Her Majesty's government as an exemplary display of Allied military courtesy. The Queen herself has been briefed on the incident, and she expressed her personal approval of your conduct. You've honored both your regiment and your nation." The news filled James with quiet pride. His grandfather's stories of fighting alongside Americans during World War II had always emphasized the special relationship between British and American forces. Today, without planning or political calculation, he had contributed to that continuing bond through simple professional respect and military courtesy. News outlets struggled to explain why the story had captured such widespread attention. In an era of political division and international tension, the encounter between Michael and James represented something pure and uncomplicated. two professionals doing their jobs with dignity, respect, and excellence. The story offered hope that beneath political differences and national rivalries, shared values and mutual respect could still flourish. The Arlington National Cemetery Administration found itself dealing with an unprecedented surge in visitor interest. Tour guides reported that guests specifically asked to see the location where the two guards met, and many international visitors expressed hope that they might witness similar displays of military courtesy during their visits. Historians began analyzing the encounter in the context of ceremonial traditions and international relations. Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor at the Naval War College, wrote in her analysis, "What we witnessed at Arlington transcends simple military protocol. It represents the living continuation of Allied military traditions that have bound democratic nations together through multiple conflicts and challenges." Both Michael and James found their daily routines changed by the attention their encounter had generated. Michael received letters from military families, veterans, and civilians who had been moved by the story. A Gold Star mother wrote, "Seeing the respect you both showed for our unknown fallen reminded me why my son chose to serve. Thank you for honoring his memory with your dignity." James discovered that his fellow Royal Guards viewed him with new respect and pride. The Queen's Guard had always maintained high standards of conduct, but James's spontaneous gesture had elevated their reputation for international military courtesy. His peers began referring to him as the Arlington Guard, a nickname he wore with quiet honor. The diplomatic implications of the encounter began to unfold as well. Military attachés from both nations used the story as an example of the deep professional relationships that existed between British and American forces. The incident became a talking point at NATO meetings and military conferences, cited as evidence of the strong bonds between Allied militaries. Colonel Harrison submitted his official report on the incident with a recommendation that both guards receive formal recognition for their exemplary conduct. "In my 30 years of service," he wrote, "I have never witnessed such a perfect demonstration of military bearing, international courtesy, and professional respect under unexpected circumstances." The story reached the highest levels of both governments. The American Secretary of Defense mentioned it during a speech about military professionalism, while the British Defense Secretary cited it as an example of the values shared by Allied militaries. Politicians who rarely agreed on anything found common ground in praising the conduct of both guards. Michael and James, despite their growing fame, remained focused on their primary duties. Both men understood that the attention they had received was not really about them personally, but about what they represented, the continuing tradition of military excellence that connected democratic nations and honored fallen soldiers regardless of nationality. A documentary filmmaker approached both militaries about creating a feature film about the encounter and the broader traditions it represented. While both guards politely declined personal participation, they agreed that their story could serve as an educational tool for understanding military values and international cooperation. The impact on recruitment was immediate and significant. Military recruiters reported increased interest from young people who had seen the story and wanted to be part of organizations that valued honor, precision, and mutual respect. The encounter had demonstrated that military service could be about more than combat. It could be about representing one's nation with dignity and building bridges of understanding between allies. Museums and military academies began incorporating the story into their curricula as an example of practical leadership in international relations. The simple encounter between two guards had become a case study in professionalism, diplomacy, and the power of individual actions to represent larger values and institutions. 6 months after their historic encounter, Michael Rodriguez and James Wellington met again, but this time under very different circumstances. The Pentagon and the British Ministry of Defense had arranged for both guards to participate in a special ceremony commemorating the 80th anniversary of D-Day, bringing together military units from all the nations that had participated in the Normandy landings. The reunion took place at the American Cemetery at Normandy, overlooking Omaha Beach, where thousands of Allied soldiers had given their lives for freedom. Both men had been selected not only for their ceremonial expertise, but as symbols of the continuing alliance between their nations. The organizers hoped their participation would provide the same kind of authentic, military dignity that had made their Arlington encounter so memorable. Michael arrived in France, carrying the weight of expectation and honor. His commanding officers had briefed him extensively on the significance of the ceremony and his role in representing American military tradition. But beyond the formal responsibilities, he looked forward to seeing James again and continuing the professional relationship that had begun so unexpectedly at Arlington. James made the journey from London with mixed emotions of pride and humility. Walking the same ground where his grandfather's generation had fought alongside American forces gave profound meaning to his participation. The teenage guardsman who had dreamed of military service while listening to war stories had never imagined he would one day represent his nation at such a significant commemoration. When the two guards met at the ceremony rehearsal, their greeting was warm but appropriately professional. Michael extended his hand with a smile, saying, "Guardsman Wellington, it's an honor to serve alongside you again." James's response was equally respectful. "The honor is mine, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. I've been looking forward to this opportunity." The ceremony itself was magnificent in scope and emotional impact. Representatives from a dozen allied nations participated, each bringing their own military traditions and ceremonial excellence to the event. But throughout the day, spectators and media attention seemed particularly drawn to Michael and James, whose Arlington encounter had come to symbolize the continuing bonds between allied militaries. During the formal wreath-laying ceremony, both guards served as honor guards for their respective national monuments. As they stood at attention, separated by only a few yards but representing different nations, the symbolism was powerful and moving. Veterans in the crowd, many now in their 90s and among the last survivors of D-Day itself, wept openly as they watched these young guards honoring their fallen comrades. The most emotional moment came during the closing ceremony when a 94-year-old American veteran of Omaha Beach approached Michael during a break in the formal proceedings. With tears streaming down his weathered face, he grasped the young Marine's hand and said, "Son, you remind me why we fought. The dignity you showed that British lad at Arlington, that's what we were fighting for. Honor between allies, respect between warriors." James had his own encounter with history when a British D-Day veteran, one of the last surviving members of his own regiment, told him, "Lad, when I saw what you did at that American cemetery, it took me back to fighting alongside the Yanks in Normandy. Your grandfather would have been proud. We always respected each other's courage, just like you two did." The international media coverage of the D-Day ceremony repeatedly highlighted the participation of the two guards, whose Arlington encounter had captured global attention. Their story had evolved from a simple moment of military courtesy into a symbol of allied unity and shared values that transcended political differences and national boundaries. During their brief time together in Normandy, Michael and James discovered they had more in common than their initial encounter had revealed. Both came from military families, both had been inspired by stories of World War II cooperation, and both understood their roles as guardians of military tradition in an era when such traditions faced constant challenges. On their final evening in France, the two guards walked together along Omaha Beach at sunset. The conversation was quiet and reflective, two professionals sharing their understanding of duty, sacrifice, and the privilege of representing their nations in ceremonial roles. "You know," Michael said, "what happened between us at Arlington wasn't really about us. It was about something bigger." James nodded in agreement. "It was about honoring the fallen, respecting tradition, and showing that military professionalism can bridge any divide. Our grandfathers fought together here, and we're carrying on their legacy of alliance and mutual respect." The story of their encounter continued to resonate long after both guards had returned to their regular duties. Military academies used their example in courses on leadership and international relations. The video of their Arlington encounter became part of training materials for ceremonial guards in multiple nations, demonstrating how unexpected situations could be handled with dignity and professional courtesy. Years later, both men would look back on their brief encounters, first at Arlington, then at Normandy, as defining moments in their military careers. They had learned that sometimes the most important service comes not from dramatic acts of heroism, but from simple demonstrations of professionalism, respect, and honor in unexpected circumstances. Their story became part of the larger narrative of Allied military cooperation, a reminder that beneath the complex politics of international relations, individual soldiers continued to embody the values of duty, honor, and mutual respect that had bound democratic nations together through decades of challenge and triumph. The legacy of their encounter would continue to inspire future generations of military personnel, demonstrating that excellence in service and respect for tradition could create moments of profound meaning and lasting impact. In an age of rapid change and global uncertainty, the simple exchange between an American Marine and a British Royal Guard served as a timeless reminder of the values that unite free societies and the military traditions that protect them.